Hi, I'm Peter Romeo, editor-at-large of Restaurant Business, and I'm here at the show with Sean Kennedy, EVP of Public Affairs for the National Restaurant Association, and as I like to think of him, the leading lobbyist for the restaurant industry. Sean, welcome.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure to have you. So when I last saw you just a few weeks ago down at your Public Affairs conference, the big topic of conversation was swipe fees. And at that time, you identified that as kind of the top priority right now for the lobbying team. Where are we there? Are we as an industry making progress in terms of convincing Congress to help in bringing down or tempering swipe fees?
There's progress, but it's slow. Swipe fees are the number 3 largest costs for most restaurants. They've more than doubled over the past decade. We're seeing them go so high because there's no competition. We have a duopoly in place. The only way we're going to break that is with Congress kicking in. The banks are pulling out all the stops to maintain that status quo, to allow them those market forces to stay as high as possible. We're seeing progress, but it's not going to be this year, but only with continued grassroots support, grassroots activation from mom and pop operators are we going to see any movement.
So you say we're making progress in terms of getting Congress's attention, or what does that mean, I guess?
I think number one is really just educating members of Congress that it's the number 3 cost, it's not going down, and that there is a way that Congress can finally inject competition into what otherwise is going to remain a duopoly. The progress in my mind is as more members of Congress begin to say, that isn't right. Businesses on Main Street are paying way too much. Maybe it's time that Congress steps in.
I know that I accompanied the Texas Restaurant Association as they visited their elected officials, and one of the things that came out was a lot of folks are paying more for swag fees than they are for their occupancy costs, for their rent and mortgages, which is really stunning. And I presume that your average bear in Congress doesn't know.
No, I mean the profit margins of most restaurants 4 to 6%. Anytime you can address the number 3 cost, that's going to have an immediate impact, and that's going to mean perhaps more shifts, more investment, more jobs, and ultimately a win-win for restaurants and customers alike.
So the other issue that seems to be front and center is with the FTC with what they are calling junk fees, what we would call traditional fees that customers have been comfortable with, that operators have been comfortable with for years. Where are we in that regard? Because that's a little bit of a different situation, given that you're dealing with an agency rather than legislation.
It's a unique issue that we're working on, Peter. You're absolutely right. Everyone has problems with junk fees. It polls incredibly well when politicians say they want to eliminate them. The problem is, what is a junk fee? To say that a delivery fee is a junk fee, to say that a large party fee is a junk fee, or a credit card surcharge is a junk fee, it defies reality. Customers know what they are getting. They're getting an extra convenience or value add when they're getting their meal delivered. They don't think of it as a junk fee. The Federal Trade Commission shouldn't ban them. We're really watching this one closely. We spent a lot of time engaging the FTC to make sure they get this right, because this would have an immediate disruptive impact for every restaurant that charges any extra item beyond what's on that food subtotal.
And at the same time, simultaneously, we're seeing a lot of activity at the state level. California's Attorney General surprised a lot of people, or didn't, with his broad interpretation of a new law there banning hidden fees.
Right.
Is it a matter of that, are those two things in concert, the state and federal efforts, or are they independent? In other words, you have to address two issues.
We have to address, it's 2 tranches. And again, I suspect that the California electeds are looking at those same polls. No one likes junk fees, but you can legislate on that, you can regulate on that, but you need to be somewhat practical. Every customer I talk to understands if they have a meal delivered to their house, they're probably going to pay a little more than if they're enjoying it in a restaurant. If restaurants are transparent, if they're open and reasonable, they can get away with charging additional items beyond the price of the food. Customers don't view it as junk fees. We need to make sure the government agrees with us and follows a correct approach.
Well, it seems to be very significant as to whether that fee at surcharge is discretionary or obligatory.
Yeah.
Is indeed that one of the chips on the table, so to speak?
That's something that we're really pressing the FTC to recognize, that if it's not an across-the-board charge, at least make sure that these discretionary ones where the customer knows they're getting additional value, But look, getting rid of service charges is going to hurt a lot of restaurants that are struggling to find a way to make it work, and particularly as we see communities that are slowly eliminating the tip credit.
The other area of concern, or what seems to be a new dynamic, is you used to see all the action on the legislative side. Now we're seeing far more unilateral things, the unilateral steps. The most obvious example being the disallowing all non-compete agreements.
Right.
Regulatory agencies, executive orders. Is the democratic process being whittled down here, and how do you lobby against that?
I think what you are seeing, Peter, is the rise of the executive branch in Washington. We saw that under Obama. We've seen that under President Trump. We're seeing that under President Biden. And they are looking at themselves and saying, if Congress is being inactive, if Congress is too dysfunctional, maybe we should use the power of the executive, the power of the independent agency to try to move forward the agenda that these presidents feel they've been elected on. You're absolutely right that the pendulum has swung a fair amount towards a really strong executive branch. For us at the National Restaurant Association, a lot of it's advocacy, but we are using the courts a lot more through our Restaurant Law Center to do an appropriate check to make sure these independent agencies aren't exceeding their statutory authority when they take actions like what you've just outlined.
Indeed, it seems like it's that much more challenging. Are there other issues that are percolating that are of prime interest to you right now, that are emerging on the radar screen? Since
I think this election is really going to matter for our restaurant operators. A lot of the tax provisions tax benefits that restaurants take advantage of are going to expire at the end of 2025. Congress was likely to pass a really substantial tax bill, so that's going to matter for us. We are continuing to work on the FAST Act. We've seen in California, there's still firefights going on at the local level, but more efforts are going to move on that front. And certainly, again, the tip credit is definitely under attack, and it's by folks that don't recognize and don't appreciate why it's such a benefit to the operator, the employee, and the customer alike. So we definitely are looking at a very busy 2025 for the National Restaurant Association and our state partners.
So I have an ongoing disagreement with our readers in that they seem to view the threat of unionization as a far down the road thing at worst, and that it's Starbucks' problem or it is Waffle House's problem. How much of a threat is that? How much of an issue is that unionization, especially given what you're saying about a more aggressive, a more assertive executive branch?
Yeah, I think Mike Tyson said it best, Peter. Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And what we are seeing is a lot of smaller operators are suddenly seeing workers try to organize, ballots being circulated. You have restaurants and coffee shops that are closing down. This is not just a Starbucks issue. Starbucks is getting the press because the media appreciates it. They understand the size. They understand the importance of it. But we're seeing this absolutely at the state and local level. It's also not happening just in traditional blue or purple states. We're seeing successful drives in red states. And so what we are doing from the National Restaurant Association is making sure NLRB is staying within the framework of what they're authorized to do, but then providing the best counsel we can to operators on how do you best communicate with your workforce where they feel like they are a part of that they have a seat at the table, and we don't even need to deal with this issue.
So yesterday we had a chance to chat for a few minutes, and you mentioned this several times. It came up in the conversation. Sustainability issues might be sort of another wave. What do you mean by that? What type of things are we talking?
Well, you certainly have a lot more states are looking at what is either the carbon footprint or what's the waste, what's the trash that's generated from a meal. We are an easy target in some respects for things like that. You are also looking at inspiration, unfortunately, in Europe, which in some instances is proposing whether QSRs should have dishwashing facilities and no single-use packaging. The notion of a burger place having to install find space for a dishwasher, that's a strange one. And we need to make sure that we don't let European ideas immediately be adopted in some of the more progressive communities here in the U.S.
So if we were to talk with a lot of the attendees here at the show about politics, first thing that might come to their mind is the upcoming presidential election. Yet a lot of them say, this is when we're on the sidelines. It's not a real issue here. It's not anyone who's demonstrably pro-industry or anti-industry.
Yeah.
You don't really have a dog in that fight. What's your reaction to that? Does this election matter to the average restaurateur?
Every election matters. And the reason why, Peter, is there's so many decisions that an operator makes every day to improve the viability of their business. But there are so many decisions being made in Sacramento and Raleigh and Atlanta and Washington, D.C. that absolutely are going to have a huge, meaningful impact on whether a restaurant's going to be able to grow, expand, move into other communities. So it's what we need to make sure of is that elected officials are thinking of restaurants, are thinking of the nation's second largest private sector employer when they're making these kinds of policy decisions. And the way that we do that is to make sure that members of Congress and electeds know that we are here, that we are watching, and that we're going to remain engaged.
Do you have any sense of what's going to happen with the two branches of the legislative division? Do you think that the Republicans will hold on to the House? Democrats will hold on to the Senate?
It is really tough. Every year we say this is a unique one. We have never had an election that has been this close. You have a virtual tie in the House of Representatives in the Senate. What people have made clear is they're willing to, quote, vote the bums out. What I think Washington is still trying to figure out is what do voters want? We've had a lot of turnover in this past decade, more than we've seen in 100 years, between control of the House, control of the Senate, control of the White House. What it means for us and from the National Restaurant Association is you have to remain adept, and you have to continue to make our issues as nonpartisan as possible, where it doesn't matter if you're a D, an R, conservative or liberal, you say, I support the restaurant industry, we need more of them in my community, how can we help?
That is great. Sean, thank you so much. As always, you're very helpful at helping us understand what the heck's going on in that strange world known as Washington, D.C. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Peter. Appreciate it.
Thank you.